Hi, everyone. I hope you guys are having a great day. My name is Hannah Spangler. I am the geometry teacher at Middlesboro High School, and I'm here to present my project or my entitled Launch into Learning, Cultivating Curiosity in an IBL Blended Classroom. So an IBL blended classroom just means inquiry-based learning. So I had a few questions kind of that I wanted to answer. So how do you keep students engaged and actively participating in an online or blended setting? Because I didn't know. And I feared that it would be a major problem this year. And I was right. And then not only did I want to worry about students being engaged, but I wanted to go further. And I wanted to help my students develop their critical thinking skills to enhance their learning in their lives. And I wanted to know if I could use this inquiry-based learning while teaching online or on a hybrid schedule or segmented schedule. So those are kind of the three keys to my project. Curiosity, so if students are curious, they're going to ask more questions and want to learn. Critical thinking, math is all about critical thinking. Life is about critical thinking. And I wanted to help students learn how to critically think and problem solve for school and for life. And then inquiry-based learning. It's a model that highlights and targets students being responsible for their own learning, asking their own questions, guiding their own ideas and concepts, and delving deeper without having to necessarily be told to do so. I want to be more of the facilitator for learning, guiding them, but not always telling them exactly what to do. So my research question is, will an inquiry-based learning approach keep 9th and 10th grade students engaged, promote curiosity, increase their critical thinking skills, and aid students in developing a deep understanding of geometry in a blended environment? So in my research for inquiry-based learning is more than just asking a student what they want to know. It's about triggering that curiosity. It's about triggering this desire in them to go below the surface, not just sit there and blindly take notes or blindly do an assignment. It's to want them taking the initiative to want to know more. And there are key components to an IBL classroom. There are 4 of them. So students end up asking the questions instead of the teacher. Research or exploration of a topic is done in class before the instruction. Students present what they learn during the research exploration phase, and then they reflect on their findings. Were they correct? How did they come to that conclusion? And the goal of an IBL classroom is to promote student engagement by empowering them to look beyond the textbook. So I had a plan in order to achieve this IBL digital classroom. I needed a way for students to be able to easily submit written work online, because geometry requires lots of drawing, constructing, writing out solutions, explaining with words on paper. That's not easily done on a computer. So I discovered these Rocket books. They're smart notebooks that allow my students to answer questions, illustrate their solutions, and then easily turn them in. They don't even necessarily have to have Wi-Fi to turn it in. As long as they have a cell phone with the app and data or Wi-Fi, they just scan it and it uploads immediately to a shared folder between me and that student. Now, things didn't always go perfectly to plan. I don't think anything this year has gone perfectly to plan. So there were a few kind of snags to this overall idea that I had. The first being that due to a combination of holdups with delivery and availability of the Rocketbooks, holdups with myself and others being quarantined during when we were supposed to be handing out Rocketbooks, our high school going back and forth between being virtual and being completely online, I didn't actually get to give out the Rocketbooks until late December. Well, early December, late into the second 9 weeks. So we really started using them on a weekly basis in January, which is much later than I had hoped. However, there are other components of the inquiry-based learning that I had implemented previously to handing out the Rocketbooks that is reflected in the data that I collected, which I had 5 key areas of data that I wanted to collect. I created a student survey, which was administered on Blackboard, that I was planning to give at the beginning of the year and the end of each 9 weeks. Now, due to those same issues with quarantine and being between hybrid and online, and the delivery method of the survey that I didn't take into consideration when I created it the first time, it came through Blackboard, and all of my students ended up telling me that they thought it was a spam email and they were afraid to open it. So I didn't have any data from the very, very beginning. So I only really have 2 chunks of this survey data. But one is at the beginning of this project, and one is very recently within the last kind of the end of the third 9 weeks. So it is a good show of how my students have grown in their ideas about this class. The second thing was regular participation, because participation is key for engagement. If they're not participating, they're not engaged. So this was mainly an observation collection on my part. Are they completing assignments? Are they involved in discussions? Are they actually participating? Then we have increased critical thinking skills. So I created a critical thinking survey that was to be administered 3 times throughout the year. It's been administered twice. It was administered the very first week of school. It was administered in January, and it will be administered again at the end of the year, kind of closer to May. And I do have those results from the first 2 administrations. Now, this deeper understanding of geometry concepts with a pre-assessment, a semester, a final exam, and a final exam. This one was to test, are they actually learning geometry? However, my school district decided that we would not be giving any comprehensive final exams, either at the end of the either at the end of the semester or at the end of the year. So I was not able to collect this data because it was not allowed by my district. They felt that our students were going through a tough enough time this year that all final exams were to be waived, so to speak, and not given. However, I do have some observational data that I will talk about that makes me think that this deeper understanding of geometry is occurring. I don't have hard data, but I do have some soft data for this concept. And then the last one is just active engagement. So this is different than participation because you can still participate and not be engaged. But for active engagement, this is kind of a compilation of the first 3. The interest survey is key in showing whether or not that the students feel engaged. And then the participation and some of the other observations that I have made lead me to think that students have been engaged. So let's look at some of the data. So first up is this increased curiosity or interest in geometry survey. And the indications that I received between the first administration and the second is that curiosity and interest have increased. They've gone up. Students are responding to this method. So the first question on this survey is that students enjoy learning about math. Initially, most students were just neutral. Yet, not yes, not no. kind of didn't care. With a slight higher agreeing that they do enjoy it, and then some very much not enjoying learning about math. The last time I gave this survey at the end of the third 9 weeks, about a week ago, it drastically changed. These strongly disagree students they've disappeared. They no longer absolutely hate math. In the disagree section, the ones who just don't like it or they don't think they're good at it has gone down. The neutrals have stayed about the same, but this agree and strongly agree has increased. Students are enjoying learning about these concepts, about math. And geometry is one of those math classes where you either really like it or you really hate it. There's not much in between. So that was encouraging that students are actually enjoying it, more so than at the beginning of the year. And then another question that I was really interested in knowing is that if they believed that what they were learning in math class would be useful to them outside of high school. Initially, I have a pretty even distribution, most of them agreeing, not sure if they really agreed or they wanted you to think that they agreed, but a lot disagreeing. Okay, strongly disagree to agree. And moving on, we've got kind of much more of a polarization going. More students are agreeing or strongly disagreeing that they will use these concepts outside of math. I tend to focus on real life application as much as I can. However, I did see an increase in this strongly disagree category as well. So I did have a little bit more polarization in this. A few more are strongly disagreeing that they are not ever going to use these concepts, but I have more who are agreeing as well. And this neutral category is much lower than initially. So the next few questions are about how they feel about the class in general as far as instruction or relating to me. And this question says, the lessons that my math teacher creates spark my curiosity. Initially, I heard about 49% say agree. Now, this was before they really even started in my class, so this was probably them thinking back to previous math teachers. Nobody really strongly disagreeing, and quite a few disagreeing or neutral. On this last 9 weeks, we see a much higher jump in the agree to strongly agree category. They're enjoying the lessons, which was also reflected in their enjoying learning about the math. And the strongly disagree students have completely disappeared. No one is absolutely hating it. And then the disagree kind of stayed the same. And then the next one is that this is something that I do focus on, is I want them to feel comfortable sharing their work and thought about the content, even if they don't fully understand. Now, this one was actually surprising to me initially because I had a lot who agreed or strongly agreed that they did feel comfortable sharing, which I was not expecting. A lot here in the neutral and 15% in the disagree. After the third 9 weeks, that 15% disagree has dropped to only 4%. So only 4% of my students disagree that they don't feel comfortable, or agree that they agree that they disagree that they feel comfortable sharing. Whereas this agree category has jumped to 46 and strong agree has jumped to 15%. Now, students being comfortable asking their teacher questions, it stayed roughly the same. It was a slightly increase from the slight increases across the positive answer choices, but overall it stayed about the same. And then I'm comfortable asking my classmates. It also stayed about the same. Actually, the agree went down a little bit here, but the strongly agree went up. And then the neutral stayed the same. And the last question on this slide, there is a whole nother slide of survey questions, is that they want to come to class. Now, this data got a little cut off, but none of them strongly agreed. About 40% agreed that they wanted to come to class, with about half saying that they were neutral. This jumped pretty significantly. 15% now say that they strongly agree that they want to come to class. 42% agree that they want to come to class. And only 35% are neutral, with 8% disagreeing. This is very encouraging to me that their mindsets are changing. They're enjoying it. They're learning. They want to learn what's going on, about what's happening in class. So, and then the last question about teaching and my teaching style is that they feel like they are learning in class. So 8% strongly agreed at the beginning, 60% agreed, 22% were neutral, and 10% disagreed. By the third 9 weeks, 23% of students strongly agreed that they feel like they are learning in math class. 65% agreed, and this neutral and disagree has dropped to only 8 or 4%. And then these next few questions are more about what students are doing in the classes rather than what the teacher is doing or the teacher's atmosphere that I created or attempted to create. So I used my Rocketbook to aid my learning. This wasn't available during the first week or the first time I gave this survey because we hadn't received Rocketbooks yet. But about 12% say that they use it daily, 65% say weekly, 15% say monthly, and 8% say rarely or never. I aim to use them about weekly, so that's where kind of the majority of these are coming from. Because especially for my online students, they don't log in daily. They usually complete their assignments weekly. They log in daily to kind of check on things, but they are not required to join Zoom calls or join class. They are required to complete their assignments, and that was a district choice as well. So this weekly was kind of the goal that I set for myself after learning about how our school year was going to be set up. Then the next one is I participate during in-class discussions in person. So at the beginning, 50% were daily, 27% weekly, 4% monthly, and then rarely or never was 15% of my students. The third 9 weeks, the in-person students, 69% of students say that they participate daily in in-class discussions, with very few saying that they participate less than weekly in in-class discussions. And then this one for the virtual classes. Now, these are the kids who are virtual. So at the beginning, only 15% of them were participating daily, 10% weekly. More were participating monthly, but 45, so nearly half of them were never participating in in-class discussions. Once we started using the inquiry-based learning, once they started getting used to it, this increased to 27% participating daily, 27% participating weekly, and it dropped to 35% for rarely or never. Now, this is not as high as I would have liked it, but I was limited because I could not require them to join the Zooms or could not require them to be in person or sort of in person online actively during class. So it was a little bit more complicated. But it was still a significant increase in how often they were participating with their fellow classmates and with me on a semi-regular basis. Then we have the discussion board, which honestly, it didn't change. It was about the same from the beginning to the end. And then these last two questions were really, really key for this study. The first one is that they reflect on how they solve the problems presented to me, which is an IBL requirement, one of the 4 that I talked about at the beginning of this video. Initially, only 23% of students reflected on how they solve problems daily, and 40% monthly, with 37% rarely or never. After this class and at the end of the third 9 weeks, 77% of students said that they reflect on how they solve problems daily. That is a huge increase. And it's a very strong proponent for this inquiry-based learning to actually be working and students be responding. And even more importantly, other than that daily, is this rarely or never dropped to 0. That means that there are no students who feel like they never reflect on how to solve the problems that are presented to them. And then engagement in math class. Only about 15% said they were engaged daily. 70% said weekly. And then 5% said rarely or never did they feel engaged in a math class. This changed dramatically. 81% of my students said that they felt like they were engaged daily. And 19% said that they were engaged weekly, with no one saying that they were not engaged at least weekly in class. This means that engagement that I was aiming for, I hit it. I'm actively engaging 100% of my students at least weekly. And considering that a lot of my online students are only participating in class on a weekly basis, that means I'm engaging nearly all of my students, at least the ones who actually took the survey. I do still have a few students who basically have never even looked onto Blackboard. No matter what I have done, I've reached out, we've called parents, we've called them. They just haven't engaged at all, not even from day one. They've never participated in anything. But of the students who do log in and do something, at least they see the things on Blackboard, 100% of them feel like they are engaged. So these were some of the comments that I got from students who took the survey. There were several more comments, but these were kind of the ones that kind of summed up the majority of the rest of them. And none of the comments that I got were actually negative, which I was rather surprised that I had no negative comments. Because I've never had a survey given where I didn't receive at least 1 or 2 negative comments before. But some of the ones that I'm encouraged to keep my grades up, I like that we do not do the same thing every day. I'm engaged because of the way the assignments are made. I enjoy learning new and difficult and hard things. It helps me expand my thinking. What's helping me learn is having practice problems that my teacher goes over with me. When I don't understand, she helps me until I understand. That they enjoy the organization of the class. They like that there's enough variety in assignments to keep them interested, but not so much that it gets confusing, and that they don't feel that the class is stressful. That alone is not normal for math classes. Math classes tend to be very stressful. I remember being very stressed in my math classes. They like the way that the teaching is quite fun and enjoyable. It's a different way of learning things, and it makes it easier for them to understand and comprehend compared to taking notes the entire class. It isn't that fun. Says you're a good teacher to talk to. It makes me feel comfortable to ask questions that I might have about any assignment or anything I want to ask personally about things outside of school. And then they enjoy how I teach. It's easy to understand and they actually learn it. And these comments were reflected in all of the comments that I received on my survey. It's working. They're learning, they're enjoying it, they're engaged, and they're doing some really good math. So the second data collection that I was taking was regular participation. So here are some work samples and some results that I've gotten from this year. So the first thing is the failure rate. And these are almost entirely due to students not completing assignments, not joining class, just not doing anything. The first 9 weeks, 33% of my students failed, which made me feel like I failed. I've never had this high of a number of students fail. But by the third 9 weeks, that number dropped to 16% of students failing. From 33 to 16. So just this daily participation, I've seen increase dramatically from the first 9 weeks. And not just because we've been in person. We've only been in person consistently since February, which was only about halfway through the third 9 weeks. Before that, we were pretty much online the entirety of the second and first 9 weeks. The second 9 weeks was right in between these two. I didn't write it on here because I was really comparing the first to the third, but the second 9 weeks was about 23% of students failed. So the number of failures is decreasing each 9 weeks. Students are being more engaged. I have more students coming back in person telling me that they come back in person because of my class, of what they hear from it, of the assignments that they see on Blackboard. They want to be there, be a part of it. So this is something that I have personally observed, is that in-person engagement is better this year than it has ever been during the third 9 weeks. The third 9 weeks is always the 9 weeks where I struggle keeping my students engaged. I have not had any problems this year. And in the beginning, I had several classes where my students were completely silent. We were in person for about 3 weeks in October, and even during like the Zoom classes that I had, like while we were online, I got nothing. They just sat there and they stared at me, and they wrote down their notes, and that was it. They did their assignment. They never asked questions. They never talked for the full 50 minutes of class. And I didn't know what to do with it, because I'm usually the teacher who has constant, almost chaos going on, from what other people say, because I want them to be talking and working together, and I had silence for 50 minutes for about 6 months. But we've been working on this inquiry-based learning. We've been working on getting them to start asking questions, to start being more engaged. And the last few weeks, they're laughing. They're talking to their classmates about the math, not just about what they did over the weekend. They're asking me questions. They're engaging in what they're doing, and they're learning. So those are my observations as far as, do I think that regular participation is increasing? Absolutely. It's going way up. I'm having more communication from online students than I have had all year. I'm having more communication in class. Students are wanting to do the assignments. They're not wanting to just goof off. They're wanting to see what crazy idea I come up with next. So here are some Rocketbook examples. All of these were turned in via Rocketbook. This one, we had a trigonometry experiment or trigonometry project that we did this week, where they were using trigonometry to measure the height of a tree and the height of the bleachers when they created a Barbie zip line. These other 3 examples, this one was a critical thinking assignment that was both for online and in person, that we talked about over Zoom, and we had discussions in class. This one was the first Rocketbook assignment that we did, where students had to draw the triangles, measure the angles, and then try to figure out if there was a relationship between the size of the angles and the length of the sides opposite them. And you also see how I graded this one. This particular student hit the concept that I was trying to get them to visualize or to see on their own perfectly. The largest side is always opposite the largest angle, and the smallest side is opposite the smallest angle. And this assignment kind of opened the way for us to move into similar figures and scale, and how to match up corresponding sides and corresponding parts of triangles. And then this last example is one of my special ed students, one of my IEP students, who was drawing the triangles and finding and solving proportions for the scale factor on her own for this particular assignment. And she was so thrilled by the end of class that she got to present her Rocketbook page instead of anybody else in the class, because we only had time to present one that day. Other kids got to go the next day, but she was so excited to present. So the next type of data that we had to do was the critical thinking survey. And the results for this were inconclusive at best. Because from the initial exam, the average score was a 56%. Well, the mid-year exam, the average score was also a 56%. And I had some students drastically improve. They went from like a 45% all the way up to like a 77 or 85%. That was about a third of the students who took the exam. Then about another third of the students who took the exam stayed exactly the same. Their score was exactly the same score to the 100th place, second decimal. I don't know how they managed that. And then the other third performed worse. They went from having like a 90% on this exam or a 70% to having like a 50 or a 40%. So ultimately, the results from this exam are inconclusive. It doesn't really tell us or tell me or anyone else much about whether or not they actually gained critical thinking skills. I think that in the future, if I do this again to kind of gauge learning throughout the school year, one, I'm not going to give them the exam on a Friday. That was probably not the best time to give it, because they were more excited about the weekends than caring about a critical thinking exam that they got a participation credit for, not a percentage grade or credit for. And this was also one of the first weeks that we were back in person, is when my in-person students took this exam. And they were so ready for just kind of human contact from their friends that I don't think that they were really focused on what they were doing. I'm hoping that the third exam that we take at the end of the year will show more growth than this one did. But I don't know that this was the best designed exam for what I wanted it to be. I think that I could redesign it in the future to make it more effective and more useful. However, on the other hand, from my personal observations, I believe that their critical thinking scores are improving. And the reasons I think this is that they need less help understanding content and instructions on assignments, especially those who are online and on Blackboard. They're learning how to navigate not necessarily having constant reiteration of instructions, or being able to just ask all the time or over and over again, what did you say again? What am I supposed to do again? So they're becoming a little bit more self-sufficient, and they're figuring out how to read between the lines on a lot of their assignments, which is good. They're also solving these complex problems easier than any group of students I've had before. We've been working on trigonometry, our sine, cosine, and tangent, SOHCAHTOA problems, and I've never had a group of students understand and be able to apply these concepts as quickly as this group of students has. I don't know if they're just more focused because they've been at home for so long, or if they're more interested, or if they really are just more engaged, and if their critical thinking skills are improving. I think it's the latter, but I don't have hard data to support it. But they are also efficiently designing and executing engineering type real world problems with very minimal instruction and very minimal guidance. I give them the overall, this is what you need to do, this is what you need to calculate at the end, and then I get to just watch and enjoy watching them problem solve, which never usually happens. Usually I'm having to be in the midst of all of the chaos, trying to help 3 or 4 groups at the same time, and I've not had to do that this year. And It makes me feel a little useless, which is a good thing because that means that they're doing it on their own. So this is also the deeper understanding of geometry contacts. I was not able to give those exams, so I do not have data for this category. I don't have the data for it. I think that they're learning the concepts very well based on their in-person assignments and what I see them talking about and I hear them talking about in class. But once again, I don't have the hard data to support this or the impartial data to support this. And the very last category of data collection for this project is active engagement. And I 100% believe that active engagement has been achieved for the majority of my students. They're more engaged than they've ever been. And like I said earlier, I've had students tell me that my class is the only class that they remain in person for. They come to school because they want to come to geometry. It's not something I've ever heard before in my life. And then a 16% decrease in the number of failures, and 81% of students reporting that they felt engaged daily, and the remaining 19% claiming to be engaged weekly, tells me that my students are engaged. And I will say that the in-person students are more engaged than their virtual counterparts. However, the virtual ones are still reporting that they feel engaged. Other than the few, probably about 10, 10 from all of my classes who I just have very little contact with, and I've not had contact with from day one. And no other teacher has had contact with those students despite everything that we've tried to get contact. It's one of those things that I don't know what else to do to be able to reach out to them. I've done everything that I can think of. And that's I'd say about 10 of my students, which is only about 10% because I have about 100 students all day long. And then inquiry-based learning, this project has been incredible this year. Even though it didn't go exactly as planned, the original weekly lesson plan that I had wanted to have, it didn't work because of the Zoom issues and online kids not joining the Zooms during class. I could reach out to them and get them engaged after school hours, but it didn't help us like in person, like at the same time. So that necessarily didn't work, but I adapted, and the Rocket books have been tremendously helpful in my weekly lessons, and my students are learning and having fun, and they love being able to just scan the Rocket books. I think that's half of the fun for them. Sometimes I forget that they're 15, 16-year-olds because they act like about 10-year-olds with some of their excitement, and it's a wonderful, wonderful thing to see. So the next slide I have is a short video of just all the pictures and projects that we've done in the very short amount of time that we've been both in person, and then some of them are from all year, both virtual and in-person students. So the first thing we did was we went on a road trip. We planned a road trip. Is it gonna play? And we had escape rooms. This was both virtual and in person. It looked slightly different, but everyone escaped. This is the most recent. We executed and planned a Barbie zip line using trigonometry to make all of the measurements. And they had a blast the day before spring break. And then up next, we're doing polygons and constructing paper roller coasters. Hey guys, that's it. It's been a wonderful, wonderful experience. And I'm looking forward to 2 more months of even more inquiry-based learning, critical thinking, and Rocket books.